Oh,
Hey,
well.
everybody. Today we're talking about clients. So, if you're a freelancer or a service provider, you've probably had a bad client. If you have, you know that they can suck up time and resources and just kind of generally wear you out mentally. Today we're going to talk about client red flags and offer tips and advice for handling challenging clients. But even if you're a podcaster or a YouTuber who hires editors or other service providers or might be in the future, you might learn a thing or two from this stream. And if you're new to the stream, this is Shop Talk for content creators, where we just talk about everything about making content. We're both content creators and also offer creative services like podcast editing, coaching, consulting, whatever, to clients. So we're familiar with all sides of the process, whether you're a podcaster, a live streamer, YouTuber, whatever. We're here to share what we've learned over the years. I'm Jesse, and I'm a podcast editor, content creator, and AI consultant. Every Tuesday, I'm joined by, or joined, yeah, whatever. Matt Bliss joins me. Do you want to tell the audience a little bit about you before we get started?
Absolutely. So, yeah, I am Matthew Bliss. I am also a podcast editor at the moment, trying to lean closer into consulting and coaching, and um, just generally enjoy talking about podcasting, which is why I'm happy to come back here every week and have a chat to you, Jesse. I was going to interject as well, in case you forgot the AI consultant bit, because I can see you geeking around with the new content that you're going to be putting out there. I think a bit later this week. There's going to be another live stream that you've got going with your team. Is that right?
Yeah, we had some technical difficulties, so we didn't go live last week, but it's me, Tara, and my sister Amanda will be live streaming every Wednesday at 4 p.m. Pacific time, where we talk about business and just give general advice about business, whether that's branding, whether that's how to implement AI into it, how to organize your business so you're running as efficiently as possible. There really aren't any areas we can't talk about. So thank you for throwing that out there for everybody. And you can find a link on my YouTube channel. There's links. Actually, we'll be streaming to this channel as well as our new channel, Brandon Business Remix. And Facebook and LinkedIn, we're just going to be everywhere with this. Now that we've got kind of the housekeeping done, let's dive in. So I've got some graphics here, and I realize I just did all of that off camera. So
It's fine. It creates a nice little
let's
mystery
fix that.
for the
It does.
for the watcher.
That's why it's so nice having a dedicated producer for live streams who can change cameras, because there's only so much we can do when we're the ones talking and participating. Little things like this fall through the cracks sometimes.
That's it.
So I wanted to get started with this screen.
For sure.
Okay, so
And suffice to say, I'm going to be leaning into you a little bit today. I think with client management, you'd have a lot more experience than I would. But let's get into this.
this is from Christo in the future. 7 client red flags to avoid at all costs. So actually, I need to bring up my browser so I can actually manage this. So give me just a
I've
second.
seen this bloke and the future around quite a bit. He seems to be the face of what is a very large marketing firm, and I've got to be honest, he kind of gives me the ick how he puts stuff together. Um, I could have the wrong person entirely, but he's kind of a guy who wears like a hat and these really fancy glasses, right? He's a fairly
That
lanky
would be
bloke.
him.
There you go. Yeah, leans into the clickbait a little bit. Maybe a bit too much for my liking, but
Well,
perhaps he's got something revealing here.
that's all the marketing side of things.
Mm,
And but it's his agency. He built it from the ground up. And when it comes to running a creative services business, I really haven't found anybody who has the approach that he does, which is in line with how I want to do things, which is very much
okay.
where I don't know how to describe it, but it's the type of
Is it
thing
a
where
transparency thing, maybe? Like doing stuff quite openly and in alignment?
it's that, but it's also how to approach dealing with clients, how to approach running your business. Things kind of across the board like that. Just everything from just good business advice from someone who's been working in that field for 20 plus years. And you'll get a feel for some of it as we go through these slides. And I don't know why.
Seems good.
I'm just trying to get it so I can see everything.
No worries.
And I had everything all set up, so let's just do this. Oh, that's not
While you're
working.
playing around with this, I actually I forgot to mention in the opening that I intended to. I have rebooted my the Dead Drop podcast, which talks about gaming news, video game news headlines, and I'm trying to make it a daily show again with a bit of help from different workflows and processes to speed things up a little bit. So if any of you are curious to explore the kind of podcasting stuff, I'll have coffee with a podcaster coming soon, but the Dead Drop daily-ish video game news, I think is what I called it. It's it's out. It's going to be almost Monday to Friday, not weekends, because we all need a break.
Yes, we do. Okay, so we'll just go with it like this. I can get the right window to move so I can see everything. Okay, so seven. It's early in the morning. I can't even talk right now. 7
It's
client
all
red
good.
flags to avoid at all costs. And it says, the next time you hear these lines, run for the hills. Don't waste your time and energy on them. There's no negotiating with these types. You're a partner, a fellow entrepreneur, not their employee. And that's a big thing I think we all need to remember. We're not employees. We are partners. Establish healthy boundaries from the start. Go for clients who are great at running their business. They understand that putting you at a disadvantage will ultimately be their pitfall. So, slide 1. Here are 7 client types that will make you lose time, money, and energy. The micromanaging control freak. They insist on doing things their way. They have little to no regard for your creative process. I think probably most of us have dealt with at least one, if not many of these. Have you had any micromanaging control freak clients?
Oh yeah, uh, maybe one for processes, but more than usually in the podcasting space, micromanagers tend to reveal themselves more in the review stage of their content. Like remove just this one word from this one episode. Oh, I found another one. Can you delete that too? Oh no, you have to go back and do this thing to finalize the episode. Invariably, they mean very little, but um, yeah, the micromanagement bit bad. It's not great for us and really slows things down.
It does, and they're frustrating clients to work for because it seems like you're just always in revisions. You get everything done, you think you're good, they go back, they find something else. And this kind of goes into why it's so important to set boundaries. And we'll come back to that idea in a little bit. Client number 2, the I'm too busy to be talking to you client. They show up late, don't have enough time, seem distracted, uninterested in the conversation, and give you the sense that they have more important things to be doing. When it comes to content creation services, the way this comes through are the people who are always pushing deadlines. They're always getting stuff to you late and want you to work nights and weekends to get stuff done because they're too busy to get their own thing done. You had any like that?
Yeah. Always. The thing that I usually think fuels this kind of client is that they don't think that you would have anything else to do except what you do for them. And so, of course, why would you need 3 days, 5 days before the release of the content to edit it? You know, they just give it to you, and then it's 5 hours before release. So you could just use that 5 hours to do the job, right?
Exactly.
Definitely not the case.
No.
Yeah.
Again, a place where healthy boundaries really come into play. Number 3, the penny pincher. I love your work and everything you do, but can you do it for less? And we have the overpromiser who can sometimes also be the penny pincher. I have friends who I could refer you to. Can you give me a discount? And I know anybody who's worked in the content creation space has dealt with a penny pincher. I can't afford that. Can we bring the price down? Or the people who try to negotiate a lower price by promising, oh, I can refer people to you.
Yeah.
Well, until you do, let's start with our normal rate, and then we'll talk about discounts or something in the future when you bring in these referrals. And with the penny pinchers,
it's like getting paid in gift cards from the shop you work at. Like you can only
pretty
spend
much
it where you are, and you don't get it until they, give you the thing. It's these are triggering for me.
And the penny pinchers, the number one piece of advice I have for dealing with them is if they can't afford the rate you quoted them, start asking them what services can we cut out to bring the price down. Don't ever bring your entire price down and do the same amount of work for less. If they want lower rates, they need to start chopping stuff out of the scope that you've talked about.
Yeah. And we talked a few weeks ago about the desire we have when starting out to over-deliver, to prove ourselves. And it's very easy to fall into that habit after you do your first couple to get the practice in. And then, because as clients, even if they're friends, they're always going to ask for more if they can get more value for their dollar. It's, troublesome.
It is. Okay, so 5, we've got the a-hole. This person uses condescending and violent language to tear at your self-confidence, self-worth, and self-esteem. And I'm going to bet that a lot of us have even worked with this type of client. Hopefully not to the point of being violent, but there's a lot of people who will use language in a way to tear you down so that more or less they're beating you into submission one way or another. And those are the people who they wear you down mentally, where you just dread anytime you see an email from them or you have to meet with them or just anything to do with their work. I haven't dealt with one who's been violent or really done any of this stuff, but there are other ways clients can be a-holes as well.
Yeah, I was thinking more the passive aggression is where this reveals itself. like negging, kind of by comments that they might just throw past you to say what they want to say without directly saying it to you, but you know what they're saying. That oh, it was a little bit, there are lots of ums and ahs this time, but it's okay this time. Like we'll get it next time. Or
Yeah.
I can't even think of any specific ones. But yeah.
Well, and that is kind of a nice segue to this. I saw these jobs posted at one point, and this is one of the things that I also recommend is read between the lines when looking at job ads or responding to people, because this is for an audio podcast editor. And at first, it might not sound that bad, but there's little things in here that's like, I have a really good feeling this is going to be a difficult place to work for. Let's see. You take pride in delivering professional, clear, and clean audio. You're obsessed with, and this is apply if, so about you. You're obsessed with podcasts, especially within the self-help and coaching space. You understand what makes content connect with listeners, from pacing to sound quality to overall flow. I don't know, maybe it's me, but what makes the content connect generally has nothing to do with the editor. That has to do with the people on camera and on mic. You're a master at editing or adjusting speech pacing to feel natural but engaging, not too slow, full of awkward pauses, and not too fast, making it sound overly edited. That's where I start seeing some little red flags starting to peek in. Anytime you edit, you can give clear, constructive feedback to help clients improve their recordings. You're confident using Adobe Audition, including spectral editing, to eliminate unwanted noise, filler, and distractions. Okay, that doesn't sound too bad as is, but we'll come back to that. You use plugins like Isotope. You're a detail-oriented problem solver who thrives on feedback and collaboration. Stuff like thrives on feedback and collaboration, it depends on the person. Sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes that falls well within the a-hole area.
Well, it's the read between the lines, right? You're going to be working with me, and I'm going to be telling you what's wrong with what you give me. Like that's open to feedback.
Yeah, there's a difference between that kind of feedback and constructive feedback of, hey, how can we make this show better? Yep. So don't apply if you're building your own agency or prefer working on only personal projects. You think podcasting is just a hobby, not a strategic growth tool. You're not open to AI tools or innovations that can streamline your workflow. You're not comfortable handling large audio files or meeting tight turnaround deadlines. And you're unavailable for team meetings between 9 and 11 a.m. Eastern Time a couple times per week. This sounds very much like a contract role, and a lot of this stuff sounds a lot more like an employee role, but stuff like mandating team meetings, that gets, at least in the US, that gets a little bit dicey when it comes to the difference between contractors and employees. But there's a lot of red flags in there when you have a whole section of don't apply if this is you. Required tools and skills. Must be skilled in editing solo episodes and interviews for clarity, flow, and impact. You must be able to paint out imperfections using spectral display. To me, this is the biggest red flag. If you're going to the point of posting this, in my opinion, there is nothing that is worth going into a spectral editor to paint out manually. If it's that bad where we're having to do that, whoever's running the show should have paused things to solve whatever was causing that noise and restart when that was gone. Between the tight deadlines, asking people to paint out imperfections, this sounds very much like it's red flags. A client that I wouldn't want to work with. And then they also had a video posting.
Did they?
It's very much some of the same stuff. Let's see. You live and breathe YouTube and shorts and reels, especially within the coaching and personal space. You understand how to create scroll-stopping hooks, frame content for virality, and support narrative arcs visually. And again, a lot of this stuff should be done on the pre-production side, so the editor's just putting stuff together. If it's, hey, we've recorded a bunch of this, you need to go figure out how to put this all together, a lot of times that doesn't work because you need to have that plan when you go in to make sure all of the pieces fit together. You're confident using Premiere and Descript with advanced skills in adding B-roll, captions, and strategic motion. You have a strong sense of what makes content resonate visually, and you're not shy about sharing improvement ideas. Don't apply if you're focused on building your business brand or agency and don't want to commit to someone else's vision. But at the same time, you want us doing all of the creative work. So you kind of can't say you need to commit to someone else's vision, but we want you doing all of it and being responsible for knowing what makes everything engaging. You think YouTube or short form video is a trend, not a core business strategy. This is all pretty much the same.
Carbon copy. Yeah, they've just copy pasted and changed a few words.
Sure. Yeah, and for Premiere, or required tools and skills, skilled in editing long-form video podcasts and micro content. You know how to source quality B-roll, apply artificial camera movements, effectively use sound effects, add dynamic text, animation, and build compelling hooks. Usually aren't hooks something that the host says. That's not usually stuff that you're doing in post-production. And stuff like the artificial camera movements, that's like painting stuff out in spectral view. For interview shows, why are we doing stuff like that? This, to me, sounds like someone who thinks the highest production value is going to somehow improve the viewership or the listenership of the show. And these are little things that, in my opinion, they're not going to bring in new viewers, and not having them isn't going to cause you to lose viewers.
Yeah, I think often this is from looking at other shows doing the same thing. Like immediately when he said hook, I knew exactly what they meant, because Diary of a CEO has set the new standard for intro hook clip for video podcasts. It's the teasing sentences that don't quite finish properly that you're expected to listen to the rest of the episode to finish. The text on screen that's like do 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 do, different fonts, different styles, quick, whatever Stephen Bartlett talks about takes his team of 3 blokes 72 hours to create a 2.5 minute hook for a 3-hour podcast episode. I can only presume that would be what they're talking about.
Yeah, that's my assumption, and it sounds like they're just chasing trends. And someone who's good at long-form content, I think what a lot of people don't understand is editing long-form content and editing short-form content they're two different skill sets. Someone who's good at one might not be good at the other, and do not have someone who only has experience doing short-form video do long-form video, because that editing style does not translate to long form video. And going back to the future, he has a team of people that do stuff, and some of his videos for a while got really unwatchable because they were like hour-long videos, and the first 15-20 minutes are cut together like it's a social media roll with sound effects and a bunch of cuts, and it's like, this doesn't work. This is really good content, but it's unwatchable the way it's being presented. So we just have to be aware of these things and ask ourselves, is this someone we want to be working with when we're seeing the ads? We've got a comment from Pigtown Sports. Welcome back. Always appreciate your guys' show. I put the headphones on and listen in while at work. Thanks for continuing to listen and support us, and glad you're getting value out of this.
Absolutely. Keep your head down. Watch out for the boss when he walks past.
Exactly. So let's go back to this.
Reflecting on all of these, there's a thing that I try to think about when I look at job posts, as a quick reflection on the stuff that we just looked at. You know that they don't really know what they're asking for, or they have a very specific idea of what they want to get out of the person, and it doesn't matter who the person is, when you're blending very specific technical skills with competencies together into the same thing. So they categorize ability to edit with the spectral editor in Adobe Audition alongside creating engaging content for people that goes viral. Like, those two things are very like specific technical or skill competencies. Like, they're completely different for a job application, I would think. And so not splitting the technical from the other parts that are required from the job, I think that's a red flag immediately, that they just don't know what they're asking for. But podcasting in general is always very gray. It's very gray.
It is. And the fact that they're asking you to use spectral, I mean, a lot of things are kind of jumbled up there. They want you using plugins like Isotope. Okay, Isotope is a company, not a specific plugin. RX generally is used as a standalone editor. There are some plugins available. You're talking about using the spectral editor in Premiere or Audition to paint stuff out, but they also want you to be at the forefront of AI technology that saves time. Instead of painting stuff out manually, wouldn't it be faster to use some of these newer machine learning powered plugins to clean your audio? So yeah, that's why I see a bunch of red flags in those types of postings.
Absolutely.
Okay, so number 6, super indecisive, uncommitted, and evasive. They can never seem to give you a straight answer. And I think in podcast editing, this is probably a little less common, but it's more common in new podcasters who don't really have a vision yet. They don't know how to structure their show. And we had one client who definitely fell into this category, wasn't a new podcaster, but they'd been podcasting for a couple of years when I came on. The producer, he would hire us to do a video for this, create custom music and like a voiceover, an all new intro. We do all of the work, they pay us for it, and then it doesn't get used. Or we get halfway through and he's like, you know what? Let's put this on pause and let's do this instead. So It's okay as long as you're getting paid for it. But if you're
Mm,
working with a client who doesn't know what they want, and my first client fell into this category of they'd been working with a show that had a producer and started their own show where there was only me as an editor, there wasn't a producer, and there was a disconnect between what an editor does and what a producer does. And there was also a lot of times of, well, I need to hear how this music will sound behind this piece of dialogue. Well, I don't like that piece of music. Try this one instead. And there was a lot of kind of back and forth of, well, I don't know if I like this. Let's try it this way, and if I don't like it, we'll go back and change things. That experience really led me to working with both of these clients are the two things that really inspired me to figure out how to better identify the clients I want to work with, how to suss out client red flags and problematic clients, and just how to better run my business so that I don't feel like I'm playing the role of their employee or that they have all of the power, trying to change that dynamic so we're equals in the relationship instead of them being the shot caller and I'm just the lowly person doing the work for them.
mm. Yeah, I'd have a very similar experience. Um, Not in a bad way, but like I've discovered that for myself, I prefer to work with people who have been podcasting for a while already and would like to hire an editor. Generally, they have an understanding of what they're handing over to you, how much time it takes, how long it takes, and they'll have a vision because they've iterated on their show a little bit and be able to tell you what they'd like changed or what they'd like it to sound like, if it's an audio show. But with new clients who've never had a podcast before and haven't ever thought of the questions that you ask them about putting a show together, I found I've had to thread the needle a little bit with some of these clients to kind of, as you said, like it's a partnership. You kind of have to work as a creative partner to take control of some of the decisions, to give them a choice without giving them all the choices so that they kind of get bogged down in the detail and you're kind of, like you said, giving them all the power and you kind of have to wait for them to get back to you. And any number of like the previous uh, client types we've been through, they could be any one of them as well. They may never get back to you and it takes 6 months for you to launch a podcast they've, contacted you about 5 months ago. It might be someone who's very micromanaging, and if you give them all the choices, they will hold all those choices and do it every single time you do an episode edit. Whereas I've tried to create something for a client making choices and they kind of say yes or say no or say, oh, that's great or that's fine, and not worrying about them not saying anything about the thing that I made, because generally that means that it's okay or good. Like it's, yeah, the indecisive bit is hard with podcasts because I think a lot of people have different ideas of what podcasts should sound like too. And you almost have to figure out what their idea of a podcast is before you create the podcast they want to try and figure out, you know, to make sure that you're shooting for the right spot. Otherwise, you have to go back to the beginning. It's very hard to like concrete that in a sentence. It's very solid in my mind what I'm trying to say there, but yeah, it's kind of similar to the experience that you talked about there.
They're the types
Partnership.
who I don't know what I want, I just know it when I see it. That's what
Yeah.
these types of clients are. And like you said, some of these clients can fall into more than one of these categories. And that kind of
Mm.
creates this super, just terrible client. So
Yeah.
the better we get at identifying these types of red flags, the better, easier it is for us to take a step back and go, you know what? I don't think this is a client I want to work with.
Mm. So what's the next one?
First-time discounters. Has never worked with you, but immediately asks you for a lower price as a trial. Well, I want to work with you, but can you give me a discount first? No, we're not going to discount. And you kind of made the comment about new podcasters. We all know, a lot of new podcasts, they don't last. They make it 5, 8 episodes and they just end. So if we give new podcasters a trial discount, they go away and we did a bunch of low price work for them and they don't come back. But this again goes back to when it comes to pricing, if someone wants to negotiate the price, that's okay. But we negotiate on the scope of work as well. You want a lower price, we need to reduce the amount of work we're doing for you. And if they're not willing to accept that, we have to be okay with letting them go. There will be other clients. We don't want to discount and do the work for a lot less just because we're desperate to land a client. Because the more time we spend on this work is time we can't be spending on trying to improve our business, market it, and find better clients.
Yeah, yeah, and it calls back again to the earlier one. I can't remember what it was called. The exposure one. Like, uh, don't worry, I can give you more work. Give me a discount, and I'll refer you on to all my friends. This is a double whammy where if someone wants a discount to begin their podcast, invariably doesn't do it anymore, they've also got a reason not only not to interact with other people in the podcasting community, but also they've probably given up because they've got a sour opinion about podcasting. So they're not going to recommend you to people for something that they're not interested in anymore. But the other bit that I want to make sure that we're thinking of when we think of all these types of clients is that oftentimes the work doesn't scale. And if we're doing our job right, we're invisible. Both of those times, the podcaster or the potential client saying, "Oh, but you'll get exposure for being on my podcast. 50% off, and I'll mention your name on the show," or I can get you more work if you give me a discount. Then I'll recommend more people onto you. Both of those things usually don't work for someone who's either just getting started or isn't able to hone their workflow fast enough, because they'll give you more work, but you're still doing more work for less money if you give them a discount when they start off. Or if they recommend you on to more people, sure, the price might go up, but maybe they have a chat and they go, "Oh, you gave my mate 50% off, mate's rates. Reckon you give me a little bit off too." It just makes it a big tightrope to walk when you're trying to make those expectations. So yeah, I agree with not giving discounts from the beginning. It's a really good idea.
Well, and then you were talking about exposure, and we talked with a client or a prospect who not wanted us, but he was working on launching a new show and didn't have much budget. And, well, can we just work together? We could never get a price out of him as to how much he could afford to pay us. And it just started sounding like, because it was for a good cause, we wanted to work with him, but we couldn't do the work for free or really discounted. We offered different ways of working together to help him get his show started. But he kept talking about, once I get started, I've got all of these sponsors lined up. You'll get free exposure to all of these companies who I think will be listening to the show. That's great, but potential doesn't pay our bills. If you want us to discount and we're taking on all of this risk that this pays off and you'll be able to pay us our rates, If we're helping you build this from the ground up, we're going to want a share of that revenue, not just being paid for the work. If we're helping you build a show that's getting these sponsors and we're discounting like we're a startup, we should get a part of that, the monetization that you do bring in. But we never did hear back from him after. I think the last thing we'd left it at, we can consult with you at this rate hourly, and guess that wasn't good enough.
No, it's always a tough conversation, and the people that flake out or ghost out on you, you never usually expect them to do that. But yeah, and it's almost like that. It's almost like an investment. If you're doing the work for them for free, it shouldn't be for free. It should be as an investment. And if they're not giving you the money right now, if you go full objective economics on it, that's money not paid to you that you could otherwise be investing to make more money. Or if it's long enough that there's inflationary issues that reduce the amount of the dollar that you would otherwise be getting, that's time where you haven't spent it and wouldn't have been able to accumulate more wealth with the money or pay off credit card debt that may have, increased over time and increased your cost. Like there's an onflow effect, so there should be a relative measure of return, not just paying your costs and kicking that can down the road for when they can afford it. It's about an investment, and I think of that a lot. One of the things that comes up sometimes for me with creators that I work with is that, contrary to what we're talking about here, I think it's okay to barter services. Like, Jesse, you've got access to, Claude's maximum level AI tool, and you have an extra seat on there. If you give me a seat on that Claude AI instance so that I can use it, and I give you a bit of my edit time every month. That comes to an equivalent cost in that month. I do a bit of extra work for you guys. That's not money changing hands, but it's an equivalent exchange. But podcasters, without a podcast coming to the table or without sponsors, there is no equivalent exchange. You're making an investment in the success of their show where you potentially need the money right now to be able to support yourself, and you can't really do it. We're not angel investors for extreme audio quality.
Yeah, trading, bartering, all of that, that's fine. But you have to have
Mm,
something tangible. You can't ask us to donate our time. And realistically, we're talking about, for this show, it will have probably been about 3 hours. I can't remember if it was video or just audio. But if it, let's say 3 to 4 hours per episode, and you're
mm,
wanting to pay us back in potential, it needs to be something tangible, something that gives me immediate value. In your example, exchanging a seat on a software for editing. You're giving me some of my time back in exchange for a service that I subscribe to and have unused capacity in. That's a value trade on both sides.
mhm. But yeah, all these. God, I can't even imagine if you had all seven of those together in one person. That would that would have to be immediately obvious to people, right?
You would think, but I've seen some stories where they are multiples and it doesn't seem that obvious. But before we move on, let's pause things for a second and ask that if you're enjoying this stream or replay, give it a like and subscribe to the channel to see more of my content. Something. I've got an
Wonderful stuff.
overlay here. Here we go. Thank you for the reminder. And
That's all good. I
also,
was trying to point to the subscribe button. It's somewhere along here. I think
yeah,
I'm on the wrong side of the screen.
it's down there somewhere. And then we also have another fancy overlay just in case you can't make the live stream. You can go to the website and ask a question. tanziasteracademy.com/ask a question. You don't need that second slash there. I need to go in and clean that up. Either way, it'll go to the same place. So let's move on to the next thing. And that's, I've got a couple of scenarios. I've been working with a client for about 6 months and everything's going great. We have a contract, but the client's not getting the videos to me on time to edit. We agreed to a 5-day turnaround, but she gets the videos to me sometimes 3 days before it has to post, and then I have to work nights or weekends to get the work done. The client also pays the invoice late. She has 30 days to pay, but is nearly 2 months late on the current invoice and has been late on 5 others. I've taken a pause working for her for a month so she can catch up, but I feel it will still be the same after a month break. What do I do? So for me, my first thing is if a client's not paying, you need to stop right away. This is something that should be in your agreement and really something that, let's look at how we're invoicing, what our process is. In general, unless I'm working with a business, let me start that over. If I'm working with a business, I'll probably do net 30 payment. And for anybody who might not understand what net 30 is, basically we do the work, we invoice, and then they have 30 days to pay. That's typically how most businesses operate. But if I'm working with an individual, I'm probably either going to invoice per episode or ask them to pay before we do the episode. That way we're eliminating this issue of doing work without getting paid. And we can change this as we start working with a client. If we start working with a client and we've worked with them for 3 months, they've been good to work with, their payments have been good, then we can look at moving into like a monthly invoicing system. So we can always be flexible here. But the part about the work getting to me late, this is one of the big reasons why I don't give clients deadlines. And for some reason, it seems like podcast editing is the type of industry that goes against the grain that most other creative services do. And they set deadlines as to when stuff has to be done. Usually we're the ones setting deadlines of, okay, this is, if we're doing a website, we need our content by this date. If you miss that, we're going to push out our delivery date. We're not going to work harder to get stuff done because you delivered stuff late. That's why when I work with clients, I tell them my turnaround time. It's usually somewhere between 3 to 5 business days. If your show airs on Friday and my turnaround time is 5 days, and you get me the show on Wednesday, you have the option of paying for a rush fee if I have the availability, or we're going to miss your publication date. And the thing we need to understand is our clients' problems aren't our problems. If they can't schedule and manage their time, we shouldn't be making that our problem and having to give up our personal time, our nights and weekends, or whatever time it is to make up for their inability to manage their own time. What do you think?
Yeah. No, look, I agree with you completely. I think podcasting definitely bucks the trend for whatever reason. And there's a whole lot of things you can connect to try and make those reasons make sense. Like the reason the client sets the date instead of us setting the date to get it to the client on time, I think largely is contributed to by this idea in podcasting that you have to stick to the week, the day, the time, the hour, the minute that you're going to release your podcast every single week, or all of your subscribers are just going to disappear. Everyone who's subscribed to your RSS feed will get frustrated with you because you missed a 30-minute deadline, a 1 day deadline on an episode you were going to release. This is absolutely not the case. But I think there's a lot of real bad misinformation spread by people who don't have a clue that makes clients put the deadlines on. Like I've even had clients who say, like I there's a few of my clients that I'm very kind with, and I try to meet them where they're at. And I've suggested to them on the odd occasion, hey, look, you guys are struggling to get an episode recorded and out on the same week. You're doing a weekly podcast. You often miss weeks. Why don't we go fortnightly? Why don't we go monthly? Why don't we record 2 episodes, go fortnightly, do 2 episodes at once, then you're only recording once a month. But for whatever reason, they really want to stick to whatever it is that's niggling at them about the release of content that means that's not negotiable at all. So I think there's a lot of things that impact passively the way that we approach these things, both from the client and our side. Like, for some reason, podcast editors and producers, they are desperate to make sure that their client is getting exactly what they need and the customer is always right. And I don't know why, if it's any other content creation industry, like you just mentioned for websites, it's definitely not the case. If you're managing a project right, you push the deadline based on when you get the materials required to do the next step, because you can't work faster in a 9 to 5 than the 8 hours you have per day. So why wouldn't that apply to podcasting as a business as well? It kind of sits in that gray area again of, someone has to decide. And it's just the editor doesn't decide because they lose the business if the client gets in a huff and wanders off to someone else. It's a tough spot. But
Well,
I read this and I don't like what I'm reading.
I don't either. And I think kind of touching on some of the stuff you said, that I think part of the reason why the podcast industry is like this is so many people look to a handful of people for all of their advice. And it's natural. We look at people that we think are successful, who are successful, and think they are the ones that we need to be kind of looking to for guidance on how to do things. It's really easy to mistake success for someone knowing what they're actually doing. So we need to take things with a grain of salt and just question, is this someone we want to be taking advice from? Are they someone who seems to have a solid track record of running a business and has a good process set up? Or is this someone who maybe got lucky with timing, or had a friend who got them into the industry and they became successful, but they don't, if they were to start out from scratch today, might struggle to reach the same level of success? It goes back to kind of what we were talking about in the beginning about Christo. He can be abrasive. He's doing, kind of to your comment about the clickbait stuff. Yes, he's everywhere because he understands how to market. If you click on his content, it's not, at least I haven't seen anything that is clickbaity. Whatever the title is, he delivers on and more. So I think that's one of the reasons why people in the podcast editing space in general are doing things kind of differently than other businesses in the creative field are is because we look at people in the field who are successful and kind of copy how they're doing it. And when it comes to business, there's no one way, no one right way to do things. What works for me might not work for you. And what works for you might not work for Pigtown Sports or whoever else might be watching. We all need to find our own ways. And if something isn't working for us, we need to take a step back and go, okay, I keep having clients who are getting stuff to me late. How can we address this? I've seen people talk about, well, I charge them a late fee. Okay, let's not charge fees. Let's not charge late fees at least, because that gives kind of the immediate ick factor and feels like it's something we can negotiate. So I don't recommend using late fees at all. That terminology, just everything about it is a negative connotation to the client. And that's bad for... Exactly, it's a punishment. Yeah. Ideally, we want to give the client choice. Your show goes up Friday. You're giving it to me Wednesday. Which choice do you want to go with? Do you want to push when your show publishes? Maybe you just republish a repeat and we'll put this episode out the following week. Or do you want to pay for expedited service? Now we're giving the client choice. They start to realize, okay, this is my responsibility. I can pay more to have it done faster, or I can just let it be done next week and figure out something for this week. For me, I found that to be the best way to move forward and kind of stop this type of behavior. Though some people will, if your client has a lot of money, they may not see an issue with that. Well, I'll just pay it anyway, because what difference does it make to me as long as I get stuff done? So those are a very particular type of client, and we have to kind of look at it as, are we okay doing all of this expedited work? Do we have the bandwidth to do it? And that's the other thing that really comes into play here is if we're undercharging, we're probably going to have a lot more work on our plate at any given time, putting us in a situation where we might have to work nights or weekends to get stuff done. Because if we bounce one client's episode today so we can get this rush work done, our client that got bumped still needs to have their work done on a timely manner. So that's where just charging a little bit more, raising your rates, it helps because you tend to get better clients and hopefully they're a little more cognizant of how their time impacts you. But sometimes some clients just don't care.
Well, it's the common refrain with mobile apps, right? People don't give the time to free apps because it didn't cost them anything. But if they paid a little bit of money for an app, they're probably going to use it. It's the same here. The bigger their investment in the podcast, probably the better client they're going to be to work with, because they've made an investment in their show and what you're producing is important to them. So they also want to keep you happy because that's where their money's going. Completely agree with that.
Well, and to take it a step further, it's when they're paying more, they're generally approaching this as, I truly want you to save my time. Here's what I'm looking for. You go do it. They want you to just handle everything. So that's a big part of it. If you're dealing with clients who they need to have their hands on everything, you're doing rounds and rounds of revisions, you're probably attracting the wrong types of clients And that's usually because you're charging less and you're getting those micromanager control type clients who want their hands on everything because they don't trust an editor to do what they would do themselves.
Yeah. But the thing that you said that I think is really important, and maybe you didn't go into it as much detail as I'm remembering, but like listen to people. Listen to the Jessies and the Matts talking about this stuff and, take in what we're saying, we're right, we're wrong. Depends on the circumstance. So looking inwardly first and assessing your situation, then looking at the clients you have with how long you've been working with them, what they're like, how many numbers they tick off on our little list there, and what they've done in the past to infer what their behaviors would be like with certain things, then figure out what to do. And if you need further advice, seek it from places that you trust. But the starting in and going out instead of starting out and then moving it in, that invariably means that you're the last consideration as an integral part of this business for what gets left over. Like you probably get, in a very static case, you probably have these people who are podcast editing gurus who recommend to you thousands of dollars of software, equipment, plugins that you should purchase to start your editing business. But they don't tell you any of the business stuff. So you've spent all this money and now you're busy recouping this investment, which you hurriedly have to recoup. And the only thing that's infinite, or largely infinite in this comparison, is your time. So you spend that first year doing 80 hours of editing a week for a very low cost so that you can recoup that cost, that what you paid for all this stuff that this guru told you that you didn't actually need, to get to zero again. So that then you can start following what Jesse talks about and start charging the rates that you know that you deserve. But you're in a less than net zero position at the beginning. Whereas if you looked inwardly, found what you needed, what you best work with, the plugins that you use, do a bit of practice with, like we talked about with the microphone equipment, get a Samson, get an ATR 2100X or whatever. Take that for a test run, and then find some clients that suit your style. That's you working inwards before you start getting stuff from the outside to then squeeze yourself into a position where you spend too much time. And I say that as someone who, as a bit of background for us starting these live streams, I told you, Jesse, that at the end of last year, I was expecting in January this year to have less client work to do, and with a lot of clients off my plate that I was trying to offload because I was majorly overloaded and burnt out last year. And it's only just now that I'm starting to get some of these clients off my plate because sometimes it takes that long when you're just trying to make ends meet. But all of that happened because I put other people first. But you got to put yourself first. Putting yourself first is the most important part of creating a sustainable business, particularly in podcasting. So thanks for saying that, Jesse. That's a really good point.
Well, and I think you made a really good point, and just sharing some personal anecdote like that helps people. And we're all, when we go online, I don't see a lot of people who are willing to talk about the negative things that they experience unless they're asking for help. That's one of the things that I try to do is I'll talk about the positives and the negatives. You just talked about how you're trying to change a negative into a positive by putting yourself first and realizing, you know what? The client should not be more important than I am, than my own happiness, my own mental health. And working with bad clients can be a drain on our mental health.
Definitely.
So let's move on to this one. I had a bad client and quickly discovered why they're constantly working with a new editor. This client was a taskmaster and asked for petty edit after petty edit. Things like, please remove the at this timestamp, and this was after a full round of edits they requested. On top of that, the client was slow to respond to requests for guidance.
Sounds
Do
like
you want
a,
to
I think it's a
tackle
number
this one
two and a
first?
three. I was just trying to frame it. I think I described this person before by accident because I got a feeling I saw where this one came from. Um, yeah, look, we've got the classic won't talk to you when you need things in order to accomplish tasks, the slow to respond, and we've also got the micromanager in there. I think that was number three, two or three. And I mean, there's a bit of context here too, where, and I think it emerged from the post that this has been derived from, that there were a lot of people that came out and said, well, this is normal. Like, what are you even complaining about? But for someone to complain about something like this means that the edits can be unreasonable. And I've been in lots of circumstances where that's the case. In fact, I'm uh, doing some edits for a client at the moment, and this is not their fault at all. They're just a very, perfectionist kind of person. They want to make sure that everything is like dialed in perfectly. But as someone who hasn't edited their podcast before, like this is a brand new podcast, I'm editing it for them. They really want to get rid of all this stuff, but they don't realize what the the time, the effort, the export, the upload, the sharing, the feedback time, how that all adds up. And these are the kind of queries you get where you arrive at the client doing this for the sixth time. And you kind of ask yourself, why am I charging by the episode? I should be charging by hour because this isn't working out for me. Like 10 hours at $100, working $10 an hour, forget about it. Whereas usually you get them done in two and it's $50 an hour and it looks great. Yeah, you never like seeing this stuff. And I've got a lot of other things to say about this type of uh, revision edit for podcasting in general. Definitely the micromanager, definitely the slow to respond. Red flags all over this thing. What do
Yeah,
you think?
I agree. I think that, I mean, first off, I want to state that this is a this is full of red flags. This is definitely a challenging client to work with. But on the flip side, I see that there's a lack of structure. A lot of there's something going on between the two sides where they're not on the same page. Because if
Hmm.
I can tell by the wording that the person is frustrated with the client, and they have every right to be, because I can pretty much envision what this type of client is like to work with. But when you're talking about asking the client asking for petty edit after petty edit, things like please remove the well I at this timestamp, I have to ask, why is that even there in the first place? Is it there because you and the client haven't discussed fully or well enough what exactly they're looking to have cut? Is it something that you missed? Why was something like that left in anyway? And if you're having a full round of edits that they're requesting, let's take a step back and ask, why are they requesting all of these edits? Are they the types of things where, like, I have one client who talks about certain things where you need to have accuracy. So there might be times where the client will say, you know what, we need to cut this because that isn't 100% true. Okay, those are things I can't make a judgment call as the editor as to whether that's factually true or not, or something that the client is willing to have in there. So those are one type of edit. But if it's cleaning up stuff like repetitions, false starts, filler words, to me that feels like the two sides aren't on the same page for whatever reason. Maybe the person just can't quantify what they're looking for. And that's our job as the service provider, If we don't understand what they're looking for, we need to put more effort into trying to understand what they're looking for. And if it's a moving target, it changes week to week, we're never going to be able to work with this person and deliver something that they are looking for. For me, I tell clients when I start with them that the first, depending on how frequently they publish, but generally the first 2 to 4 episodes are going to be a little bit bumpy as we get to learn each other, learn what they are wanting, how I work, workflow, all of that stuff. But if we hit the 4th episode and I'm not nailing an edit that they're happy with, then I'm not doing my job. I'm not understanding what they're looking for. So to me, this sounds like a combination of a difficult client and an editor who, for whatever reason, isn't able to understand what the client is looking for.
But to give you a bit of a break there, by the time you get to episode 4 as well, you kind of know what kind of feedback you've been getting from previous episodes. So if that runs against the kind of feedback you've been getting for number 4, like you can't create a pattern of what this client actually wants from the feedback you get over 4 episodes. That means that's where the red flag pops up for you, right? That this
Exactly.
client doesn't know what they want. We have to have a meeting to figure out what that is and bring this all up front and try and get it down get them to state exactly what they need. And if they do that and then consistently maybe end up in the position that this particular editor is in, where they just haven't decided, then yeah, maybe it's time to send them off into the great abyss. But the systems aspect of that, super important. Like recognizing that it's not just about you. Like you will adapt your systems depending on the client's needs. But there's a give and take there.
And I think the other thing here is when you get to the point of realizing you need to have a conversation because you're not on the same page, ask yourself, is this even a client I want to continue working with? Is it even worth taking the time to meet to try to solve this issue, this disconnect? Or are we just better off cutting ties and moving on?
Yeah. It's tough decision to make. But having those hard conversations, it's scary, but it's also really useful and great practice, especially when you're early on in your career.
It is. So let's move on to this one. So these are kind of generally things that I'm not sure how to phrase it. Talking points for advice and how we can approach working with these difficult clients. And the first one is our mindset. It's so easy. So many freelancers do this as a side hustle. They work traditional jobs. So it's very difficult to get out of that employee-employer relationship mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to understand when we're a freelancer, we are running a business. We aren't an employee. We are a creative partner. We should be equals with the client, not them higher than us and not us higher than them. And I see creatives who they want to think that they're better than their clients and we know better than they do. And that's just as bad for that relationship because at the end of the day, that's what this is. It's a relationship.
Yeah, definitely agree with that.
We've got a comment from House of Jen. So in traditional settings, there's usually something like a 2-week notice. In podcasts, what would that look like? When I'm working with a client and we cut ties in my agreements, we have a 30-day window where they have to give us 30 days or we have to give them 30 days notice. And depending on the client, I'll work with them. If it's a good client, I'll work with them however long it takes to let them find a good editor to replace me, whether I'm bowing out or they need somebody cheaper, whatever the situation is. I'll work with them to help them have a smooth transition, because we don't want them to have any kind of a challenge finding a new editor or trying to rush through that process. But having said that, if it's a difficult client, I'm honestly not going to be as motivated to stay on a little bit longer to help them out. How do you handle 2-week notice type thing?
Honestly, for me, uh, with the way that I work, I tend to work in with the client a little bit more than I think you would have stated there. Uh, there is the client that I've been trying to get rid of for ages that really was really bad for me. Um, I did everything bad in terms of what you just said, where uh, the head of the organization was the person who was actually causing all the trouble. Like they were rough to work with, still are. And what I did for this not for profit that I've talked about on other shows actually is that I found a replacement for me. I gave them an onboarding time. I slowly introduced them to the workflows and processes I created for this client. Uh, Onboarded them, helped them out, even did a bit of voiceover that I was doing initially to try and smooth the transition to bring them into the organization. And, one of the big red flags for this particular client is that the not for profit was running out of money and they said, we don't want to pay you anymore. So I was like, okay, well, you're also not making decisions that improve the circumstances here, and communication's awful and all these bad things. So I'm going to leave. But I've done tens of hundreds of hours of work for them at this point for the last 4.5 months just to get this guy going, and I'm not going to get paid for it. So that's my experience, and I would urge people to learn from that experience and do exactly what Jesse just said. Like a two week notice, that's fine. Uh, it can be whatever arbitrary number you need it to be to ensure that you can have your bases covered. If it's important for your income, absolutely. 30 days, they continue to pay for episodes to get done. If you're worried about not having the money and them just like completely sandbagging you and not giving you episodes to edit, and so they don't have to pay you, have a retainer in place to make sure that those 30 days will cover your baseline costs if it's necessary. But the other thing that came to my mind, and Jesse, you might be able to share your own experiences with this if it's been the case, that there have been times where I've created assets for clients and they've paid for my time. But sometimes this notice period comes with an offboarding period where you need to provide the assets to the client to ensure that they can continue their show with another editor if they choose to get one. I did that with the not for profit. Um, is that something that you've encountered on a regular basis, or do you factor the creation of assets for a podcast into your initial costing to make sure that the offboarding doesn't create extra work? Is there something that you've done in that instance?
I think I'm not quite following where the offboarding
Okay,
is.
so think of it this way: you've created a video podcast for this particular, client. You've created an intro and outro sequence, uh, music selection because you use your royalty-free music service and they selected a track that they want to use. Perfect. Uh, let's just stick with those two. I don't want to overcomplicate it. But you've created an animated sequence for their intro and outro, used B-roll footage from your royalty-free service. It's a very specific, thing to put together. But if they intend to continue using those assets with another editor, and you've been supplementing their use of that via a subscription that you're in control of, then handing it back to them, you also need to hand back the service you used that they'll need to pay for in order to continue using the music, using the B-roll footage for the intro, outro, whatever you put together. When I think of offboarding, that's the kind of stuff that I'm thinking of. It's not like, how was your time with me? We're going to have an exit interview. I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions about your time with my freelance business. All that kind of stuff you usually think of with a big corporate. But things like making sure that the thing that I think of is a client ending the service with you and then telling all their friends that, and they didn't give the assets to me, and I'd pay for all this stuff and they didn't give it to me. And, you don't want to be bad to work with. So making sure that you kind of package things up, send it off with them and say, here you go. These are the things you need. You're good to roll. Thanks for working with me and we'll see you next time.
Okay, so how I approach that is we charge for all of the asset creation, whether it's part of the onboarding process, part of the launch. We cover that. That part's always paid for. When it comes to the licenses, the client always pays for those. It's always on their subscription. We'll figure out what we're using, but we have them sign up for Epidemic Sound or whatever stock site we're using for music, or if we use B-roll or whatever. That way they own the license, because if there's ever a situation where there's an issue, they're going to be the ones who are in communication with YouTube or whoever sent the issue. So it's best to just have them own those licenses. Just like if we build a website, the client should be the one responsible for registering their domain name for their hosting. With podcast editing clients, they should be paying for their hosting. Licensing of media assets should be the same. So when we offboard, that's really not an issue because they already own all of those licenses. They can move on to the next editor. They have all of the assets in place. And when it comes to, like, say, the video intro and outro, or if we did an audio intro with music and a voiceover, whatever it is, I'll put all of those in a folder and give them to the client. That way they have all of the assets, and the next editor has everything they need to be able to hit the ground running. What I won't provide are like templates for if I have a template in Final Cut Pro or Hindenburg or whatever. I'm not going to include presets because that's all custom work that is my workflow. If the client wants kind of those templates, they can pay extra for that. But generally, we all work in different platforms. So those types of templates aren't going to be useful in most cases. I use Final Cut Pro. Most other editors are probably using Descript, or they're using Premiere, or they're using DaVinci. So there's not usually a huge amount of overlap there. So I just provide the assets as they are, and they can fit those into their own workflows.
That speaks to a direct experience I had creating templates for the not-for-profit for new editors coming in to edit the episodes. Invariably, I created them in DaVinci Resolve version 19. And of course, the editors that came in, one used Premiere. Okay. The second one had DaVinci Resolve version 18, which meant the templates I made in 19 were incompatible with this version, which meant that all the time I spent creating these templates for people to use and export them and get all the assets together was time wasted, unfortunately. So I learned that from experience. But yeah, that's what I mean by offboarding. So that's probably what this notice period would be like. Um, yeah, I don't know. That's a complex one, but mindset helps. Segue.
I'm trying to think if there's anything else. We'll move on. Okay, so
Sure.
setting boundaries. We talked about that earlier, and this is the biggest thing when it comes to working with clients. We have to set boundaries, whether that's we should have set business hours that we communicate with people so that they don't think that we're just sitting there and we're going to answer their questions at 9 o'clock at night or on the weekends. Even if you're working nights and weekends, have a set time where you're actually going to respond to people. They don't need to know when you work, just when you're available to respond to them. Other boundaries are just making it clear to the client that something like you don't work weekends. That way they can't expect to drop something on you Friday and have it done Monday. Trying to think. Do you have any other examples of boundaries that you can think of?
Maybe not boundaries, but more constraints. Like the common one that would come to my brain is maximum one review or two reviews for feedback before getting the finalized version. That's a boundary of time spent for any one client, and it sets the boundary that they can work in as well. That they have one or two shots to get this right in terms of feedback, and it's either going to cost them money or they won't get any more iterations on that. But time's the biggest one. Time's huge. We could do an entire episode again thinking about how people, particularly editors, spend their time, particularly knowing that you will generally be in one room that's probably very available to you in proximity to a kitchen and a bedroom, and you don't have to leave the house to do it. And you could very easily spend 10 to 12 hours a day in your room editing nonstop and just doing work for clients, and there wouldn't be any off time. This is the same kind of thing that a lot of remote workers experienced during the pandemic. If you had a lockdown in your country or wherever you are, people didn't know when to switch off. So setting these boundaries, the time-related boundaries of when you work, it allows you to switch off as well as setting expectations for clients. And I think it's a huge thing. Like I've changed the way that I deal with my phone because I mean I have emails and stuff, but I've set a focus mode from 9 p.m. at night till 9 a.m. the next day, which means my phone can't be used for anything until I get to the computer and deliberately start doing work. That is the only time I respond to emails. And the world hasn't crashed. I haven't made that, clear to my clients that that's something that I do. And none of them have even noticed. It's just business as usual. So maybe even it's a bit of a mindset thing too. The idea that you can set boundaries and it's not going to ruin your business when you do. But I think time's the biggest one.
And I think you touched on something that's really important is we need to set these boundaries not only for our clients, but for ourselves, because when we work at home, it's so easy to, let's rephrase that. When you go work in an office, it's so much easier to know, okay, I go to work, I do work, and then I come home. When I'm at home, I don't do work. I know there's people that bring their work home with them, but that just makes things
They've got
messy.
different issues.
Yeah. But when you work at home, it's so easy to go, hey, you know what? After dinner, I'm going to go into the office and work on an edit. And that type of thing can start to really wear you down because you don't have those mechanisms in place to go, you know what? These are the hours I don't work. Maybe I set aside, if I'm doing this as a freelancer, as a side hustle, maybe I dedicate 2 nights a week to editing, and maybe Saturday morning to editing. The rest of the time is for me and the family. That's why it's so important to set those boundaries for ourselves, or we're just going to burn ourselves out. We need time for ourselves. We need time to recharge. We need time away from the computer, away from client work, just time away from everything, and do things we enjoy. Things, go outside, go for a walk, go for a hike, go biking, running, whatever brings you joy, whatever helps you recharge and reset and get away from the stress of daily life. I mean, that's the best I can say for setting boundaries is we need to balance that work-life balance. There's too many balances in that sentence, but you know what I mean.
Balance is important. I mean,
It
you can't
is.
say it enough times. I think there's um, a actually, let's stick with one that I do know. Um, I don't think it's a cognitive bias, but a psychological proclivity, Parkinson's law, where the work that you allocate will be made to fit the time that you give it. So you have a task, you have 2 hours to do that task, it will take 2 hours. The same task, if you give it 3 hours, will also take 3 hours. And the reason this isn't spot on with the point I was going to make, but it gets close, is that time spent recovering and recharging, like you said there, feels like time wasted because you could be spending it editing. But there's diminishing returns the more you spend on the edit and the longer you work without taking that recharge period. You'll be 100% effective for 2 hours instead of being 100 and then 90 and then 70 and then 50% effective across 6 hours for the same task. It's just the recoveries are non-negotiable and the boundaries help to create that. But
I definitely agree.
we have a question, don't we?
We have 2 comments. Sarav, sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. I just joined. I think I missed most of it. Well, that's okay. The replay will be available afterwards. And then we've got a question from Jen. How would y'all approach the time zone problem when setting response time boundaries? For me, time zone isn't an issue. I have my business hours. They're 8 o'clock to 5 o'clock Pacific time. That's the beauty of most communication these days. Electronic communication is time zones don't really matter unless there's a really pressing need, like an emergency. But usually with the type of work that we do, I haven't really run into that. So, I mean, one part of those boundaries, clients don't have my personal phone number. They have a business phone that is honestly most of the time not even charged. It's not something I monitor unless I have a recording session and they need to get in touch with me. And the clients know that. I don't respond via text. We do all of our communication via email. If we need some kind of meeting, I have a calendar link that they can use to schedule a meeting. So that's how I handle it. But so since we predominantly use email, that's asynchronous communication, so time zones don't really come into play. This is the time frame during which you can expect a response. You can contact me anytime. You can contact me at 3 in the morning my time. You can contact me on the weekend, but you're not going to get a response outside of my business hours.
Yep. I have had that problem. I, as someone who is Australian who started doing like side hustle freelance editing before I left for Ireland, where I live now, and having people that I know in America as well, I'm caught between time zones a lot of the time. The asynchronous thing, amazing. Wherever I can make that happen, I do. But the not-for-profit that I mentioned earlier, that was a troublesome client, they are in Australia. And I've had clients in America, and they sometimes want to meet for a chat just to, talk a game plan. It may not be every week or every month, but it's regular enough that you have to deal with that sometimes. And like Jesse, us trying to schedule this thing with daylight savings being different between your time zone and mine, there was a teething period where you were waking up a bit later and now you're waking up earlier because our time zones finally shifted into daylight savings together a couple of weeks ago. So the that asynchronous communication thing, absolutely agree with that. Email has to be the way you do business, and it's really not the worst thing in the world to say you send me a message whenever you want, and I'll get back to you when we're in business hours and when I'm available to give you that. It feels scary, just like I said before, but yeah, you have to. There's no way you can be available for India and the UK and America and Australia and Japan. Admittedly, that's like only a couple of hours difference, but yeah, you're gonna kill yourself doing that.
Yeah, and when it comes to meetings, that's one reason why I try to stick to US clients since I am in the US. Even if they're on the other side of the country, I can usually make 8 o'clock in the morning work, which would be 11 o'clock their time. So we still have about a 6-hour window with which to schedule meetings. If we get overseas, that becomes a little more challenging because it means somebody's having to compromise a little bit more and do things either earlier in their day or later in the day than they might like. So
Mm.
again, it goes back to everybody's got to find their own way. Maybe you find a way, or maybe your way is to find people who are within so many hours of where you live. Because we do live in a global economy. I know there are some contractors, freelancers, service providers, whatever you want to call them, who are willing to get up and meet with people at 3 in the morning because they'll do anything to get that client or keep that client. And if that means inconveniencing themselves and meeting with them in the middle of the night, they do that. That's not right or wrong. We all choose what works for us. Jen, hopefully that answers your question. And we've got one more from Sarav. Thanks. I'm currently dealing with a tough customer from FMCG sector. I can take tips from here. I'm not sure what FMCG is, but if you've got any
Fast
specific...
moving consumer goods.
What was
Fast
the first
moving
part?
consumer goods industry.
I'm
I don't
not
know
sure.
what's It's an unusual category. I assume it's like drop shipping, maybe, or I don't know. Saurav, jump in the comments and tell us what kind of FMCG you're dealing with. But sorry, I didn't want to jump in there. I just wanted to make sure we could cover the acronym
And
quickly.
and if you have a specific question, go ahead and throw that in here, and we'll see if we can help. I'm not sure. That's not an industry I'm familiar with, but a lot of times customer problems are kind of the same across the board, so you never know. Okay, so setting boundaries. Next one is using agreements, and that kind of ties into some of the stuff you were talking about setting processes. And it's been a while since you made the comment, so I can't remember, but whenever you're working with a client, make sure you have an agreement. Agreements, a lot of people get turned off by them, but they're there so both sides know what to expect. It's a way to get everybody on the same page. This is the turnaround time. This is how much it's going to cost. We don't start editing until we have all of your assets. I see so many people who post frustrated because I have 3 episodes that are almost done. I'm just waiting on these assets from the client. And I keep emailing them and I'm still waiting. The easy solution to that is don't start until you have everything. That makes everybody be responsible and know, okay, if I have all of these assets, I know I need to get them done now in order to get my episode edited. I think that goes back to making this a more even relationship and a partnership. If you let the other side call all of the shots, you're always left waiting. There's always going to be that frustration when the other side isn't doing what they should be doing.
Yep. And this is life advice, I think. I think romantic relationships, business relationships, friendships. I mean, you don't create a contract when you make a new best friend and see how the activities go with that presented contract. But coming to an agreement about the way things work and how things are and what each of us want to get or don't want out of a relationship, super important. And particularly for podcasting. Podcasting, I mean, we talk about content generally, content creation, but podcasting always sits in its own fantasy space that no one else sits in, where the client has a different idea of what a podcast is or what they want. You have a different idea of how you put that together and how it could look. You might have a different idea about how much you need to edit or how little. Whatever needs to go into that agreement, I think the most beneficial part is that you may talk about it or negotiate, but that gives you more information. It lets you learn more about the client. So, agreements, I don't think, I mean, I say this as someone who doesn't make their clients sign agreements, but I don't have any clients who haven't been referred to me or that I know personally somehow. And it hasn't been a problem for me so far, except for the ones that I mentioned earlier. But I think it's super important. And as soon as I make a shift in my business, agreements potentially into contracts, that's going to be something that I'll be changing for sure.
And the other thing about agreements is they give you a way to push back when clients are like some of the examples we talked about earlier. When they're pushing on the boundaries you've set, your agreement should clearly have outlined what those boundaries are. Having that agreement gives you something to refer back to and say, hey, you know what? Remember our agreement? We discussed that there's only one round of revisions. We need to figure out what's going on here because we're getting more than one round of revisions. Do we need to adjust the scope and the price to accommodate a second round of revisions? Or can we take a step back and look at the process to figure out why we're not catching everything on the first round? So that's the agreements and contracts aren't there to, they're kind of there to protect us legally, but the reality is any good lawyer can probably rip apart any contract we're using. So they're there more as a reference to point people back to when somebody starts coloring outside of their lane.
Yeah. And the immediate friendship example I thought of is two people, to the example you just said, two people that are mates keep going to a theme park and keep going on the roller coaster, but then one of them nudges the other one and says, but you vomited the last 3 times you went on this roller coaster. Do you really want to do it again? I think that's like, you know, that's friends learning from each other, coming to an agreement that maybe we don't do roller coasters together. because it hurts both of us.
Yeah, and that's a really good example. And one other thing I want to touch on is that's why I tend to call them agreements than contracts, because
Mm,
contracts have a much different, they give you a different feel than an agreement. Even if they're the same thing, wording can have an impact on perception. So we've
yeah.
got Sarav came back with
Mm,
some answers. Companies which make different daily use products ranging from soap to tobacco. Example, Unilever, P&G, Johnson & Johnson. After many attempts, my customer won't engage in strategic discussions. He just wants to stick to day-to-day operational challenges, which makes it difficult to hit my sales quota. And he's an account manager in a SaaS company. So,
mm.
I mean, are you an employee or a contractor? Because that, in some ways, that makes a difference. In other ways, it doesn't. But if the shot callers aren't wanting to engage in strategic discussions, the
It's
only
hard.
thing I
This
can
one's hard.
think of is to just have an open and clear meeting with the person in question and be able to communicate calmly and rationally why you need to be able to talk about strategic strategy and how not being able to do that is impacting your ability to hit sales quotas. But yeah,
Mm,
that's a tough situation because you're not you're not ultimately the person in control of what you do.
yeah. And this is one of those jobs where KPIs run they run you. Like you have to hit a number in a certain period of time or you run into issues. I actually had a friend in Australia who, well, I've still got that friend. They still exist. We're still friends. Um, they work for a scientific instruments sales company, and the instruments that they sell go to uh, science wings of universities, um, beer factories, factories that manufacture foods and those kinds of goods. And there are some years where he hits his sales targets, and there are some years where he doesn't. But there isn't a day where I don't hear that he has had to go to a place to fix a broken piece of equipment that they installed 5 years ago, when instead the problems could be better solved by replacing the equipment and the costs being less, with him being able to hit his sales quota easier by selling them that product. But often those decisions are difficult because the people he's talking to that own the products, they don't make the strategic calls like Saurabh is talking about here. Instead, they think of the immediate moment. We need to do this thing. We need to get this fixed, fix the thing, and we can do the thing. It will break in a month, 2 months, but we'll just call you back and fix that again. Whereas, strategically, you can say, well, I've got this better product. You spend a little bit of money on this, and it will save you for the next 5 years, and I won't have to see you again. And I'll hit my sales targets. Everybody will be happy. But no, it's the momentary, it's the operational stuff that really makes that difficult. And I know personally, I don't, I've never worked in a sales role. I don't think I could advise on how to make this work, except that maybe your quotas go down when customers just don't come on board. But that's not the way those kinds of businesses work. It's a little bit out of the range of content creation, I think.
But I mean, we've all worked, okay, maybe not all of us, but most of us have worked for maybe a good company who has a bad leader or leadership is toxic, whatever the situation is. And
Mm,
sometimes even having conversations with the decision makers doesn't change anything. And in those situations, all you can do is kind of make peace with this is the way things are. What can I do that's in my power to allow me to be as successful as possible? And just look for other opportunities, and hopefully a better one comes through. I wish I had better advice for you, but yeah, that's a tough situation. And I
It's actually
can
great advice. It's great advice. Like the things you control is maybe I don't feel like emailing that customer because they asked me to fix that one thing that one time. Maybe they have to wait 2 weeks before I get back to them and make it hard for them. That's the thing you can control and that makes your life easier. It's actually very good advice, I think.
yeah, I feel for you. I've been in situations where my manager or someone above me who makes the decisions prevents me from doing my job to the best of my ability. It's frustrating, but some people, it doesn't matter how well you can explain your side of things and how it's impacting your ability to do your job. Some people, they don't listen or not going to change how they see things. So that's the
Mm.
best advice I have. And I do wish you luck. Feel free to ask more questions if you have them.
Sounds like you need to
We
start a SaaS account managers podcast, giving advice to other account managers about how to deal with tricky clients. That's something we can get on board with, right?
Well, that's something that my other podcast or other live stream that's happening tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, we might be able to help advise a little bit better on that. Just
Amazing.
another shameless plug.
Nothing wrong with that.
Okay, so forget where we are. Use agreements. That's not what I want. Let's try that again. Okay. Communicate. Communication is it's huge when working with clients in general. When it comes to working with challenging clients, a lot of times the challenges are just the two sides. Even if you're speaking the same language, sometimes you're speaking different languages. Sometimes there's misunderstandings, miscommunications where somebody says one thing, the other person interprets it or takes it a different way. And a lot of times, those types of issues can be easily solved by jumping on a call and talking face to face. Email communication, as much as I love it, can be, it does allow for room for interpretation and for people
Mm.
to read tone or context into things that may not actually be there. So, communication is key to working with any type of client and figuring out what kind of communication is needed. Sometimes you get on the same page and you don't need a lot of communication. I have clients who just send me an email. Here's a link to the files for our next episode. I edit them, send them back. Okay, here's the link for the edits. Let me know if you need any changes. That's it. Other clients need a little more hand-holding. Some need you to respond to know that you got their email. So I've kind of gotten into the habit of just responding to everybody because I've run into that more and more. Just let me know you get it, because I guess a lot of people just sit there and think that maybe they didn't get it, and they're going to sit there and obsess about whether I got their email, their files, or if it's lost in the ether somewhere. But communication is good.
Yeah. To the point now where I've evolved my process beyond emails. For any clients that I create show notes for, I now put them in a Google Drive in commentary mode so that if they make updates, I actually get notified when they make those updates. So that's an extra layer of automated communication to see that there's interactions from the client for me when they're updating that content. Um, but yeah, absolutely agree. Communication is scary too. I think it sometimes feels like when we email too much, for example, that they don't want to receive that many emails. Like, I don't want to bother this person, so I'm just not going to tell them about this one thing I need to tell them. I'll just wait until I have a lot of things to say and just bundle it up all then. But getting on the same page, over communicating sometimes in language that they understand, like the language thing you mentioned is important for us as podcast editors too, because we might give feedback about an episode and say, "Oh, you were a little bit, there was a little bit of sensitivity in the high end there of your microphone. You might want to get that fixed up." It was around 4,000, 8,000 hertz. Don't know what it could be. Maybe there was something ringing in the background, but maybe fix that up. They may not have any idea what you're talking about. So instead of doing that, say, "Hey, let's jump on a call and see if we can assess your environment and background and see if we can fix that up." That's a terrible example, but you know, coming to the client where they are, having a shared language to communicate information. But systems, again, come to play there. Having systems in place that both of you understand, come to agreement about, that allow you to communicate easily, like the email back and forth thing. That happens more often than not with me now. And it's great. It's I think it's awesome when you can do that with a client. It means that you've got a good one. No red flags there, I think.
And to touch on one thing before we move on to the last one, so we can wrap things up, is what I've found with email is the longer it gets, the more information gets lost because people start skimming. So keep it simple, to the point, use bullet points, make it as easy for people to skim and read and get the most important things. If it's paragraph upon paragraph, you have to assume a lot of that is just being skipped.
Yep. Treat it like you're creating content for someone and make it as easy for them as possible. If you have to write paragraphs, bold out the important sentences in it. It doesn't mean you're yelling at them. It means that you're pointing at the things that their eye will be drawn to that you need to talk about.
Yeah, pretty much create emails like the person on the other end has ADHD. Make it simple and to the point, and that's going to help. And the last thing I wanted to touch on is when we're on discovery calls, talk to the prospect about their working styles, your working style, because it seems like so many people, they want to focus on pitching their services and selling their services and talking a little bit about what the client wants, that there's no talk about how you want to work, how we work, to make sure that we're all on the same page. And that reminds me of one thing I wanted to talk about with agreements, is that you want to have like a 30-day clause in there where either side can effectively end the agreement in the first 30 days for any reason. That gives both of you the opportunity to work together for a month to see if this is a relationship you want to continue. It's not good to lock yourselves into a 6-month or a 12-month agreement if you haven't even worked together yet.
Yeah, that's why I look at some of these podcast companies that sell, like, 6-month packages for editing services and wonder how much of that discovery work they're doing in the background. Whether you just send them content by subscription and they just edit an episode and there's no room for feedback. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the comments one of the situations we talked about earlier could have been solved by talking a bit about the workflow and how the client works to hash things out, so you're limiting the revision rounds, so you're not doing endless revisions and each time they're finding new things. I've had a client who they'll listen to the entire thing, have edits, they'll listen to it again, have more edits, send it back, they listen again, and you just get to the point of saying, look, we need to limit this to one round of revisions. So instead of sending things, I want you to start a document, get everything down. If you need to listen to it a second time, do that so that you're not missing anything, because we're going to start charging for additional rounds.
Or it's just a conversation where you say perfection is the enemy of good and just let them go. And the easy editing job just becomes easier after that. I reckon if you go
Exactly.
1 or 2 weeks.
Let me find. We'll just hide that. And then we've got one last comment before we end things. House of Jen, I've run into that with normalization. What he wanted was for whispers to be louder, not for the whole project to be normalized. Yeah, that's communication. And yeah, with whispers, unless it's done in a really good recording space, to bring up a whisper to be as loud as regular dialogue, there's going to be a ton of noise. And I kind of wonder why we're wanting to make a whisper louder than it is. To me, that's kind of contradictory.
It's a bit odd. I can't, unless they were, a little bit, on and off the microphone and there was very soft bits that perhaps got caught in a gate or something that maybe they were running in the microphone at the time, but then it will be gone destructively. I don't know. Either way, I think, Jen, that's a bit of you and a bit of them. Like they may have asked for normalization, but maybe asking why they want to keep the whispers. That could also be the thing that solves the problem.
That, again, falls into that micromanager control freak. And also, another thing we need to do a better job of when we talk to clients about what we do. I mean, this will apply more to podcast editing, but it applies to anything, is our clients often don't know what is possible with what we do. So we need to help them understand what's possible and what's not, instead of bending over backwards trying to make whispers sound as loud as everything else. Have conversations with the client or the prospect about what's possible. Another example, we can't take something that you record with your laptop inbuilt mic and webcam and make it look like you recorded it with a nice mirrorless camera and a nice mic. We just can't do that. And I think that's where a lot of struggles with clients come from, is like for graphic designers. Well, they'll just fix that in Photoshop. Photoshop can do a lot. And these days it can do a lot more. But we should still focus on getting the best original content at the capture stage.
Yeah, we'll fix it in post.
Exactly.
In everything. Fix it pre. Don't rely on post.
Yeah, we're here to make things, give it the shiny polish. We're not supposed to be fixing mistakes from earlier in the process. And with that, I think it's time to wrap things up. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next Tuesday. Do you have any parting thoughts?
Just make sure that you subscribe to the Dead Drop daily-ish video game news and give it a listen, because you'll enjoy it.
If Matt's doing it and that's the type of thing you're into, I'm going to guess it's worth enjoying or worth subscribing to and consuming. There we go.
But also, make sure you stick around for tomorrow when you are doing your
live stream for Brand and Business Remix, where we're going to be talking about AI and how you might be able to use it for your running your business to be a little bit more efficient, to save some time. So maybe you can improve that work-life balance we mentioned earlier. And thank you, because I'm terrible with self-promotion. It's always nice to have a little Nudge, nudge to remind me.
It's just
See you
promotion if
next
you're not
week.
doing it yourself.
Exactly. See you next time.
Bye, everybody.